A Columbia professor received a note, scrawled on toilet paper, unsigned, correcting his cancer model. The writer? A 12-year-old orphan, hiding in the basement of the university library. It was 2 hours past midnight when Wren Elkins opened her eyes, though truthfully she hadn't really been asleep. Sleep came in fragments these days, 20 minutes here, 10 there, light enough that even the soft hum of the library's HVAC would jolt her back. But tonight, the stillness was louder than usual. Snow had muted the city's usual pulse. It was the kind of silence that made thoughts louder. She sat up slowly from beneath her pile of coats and blankets, careful not to knock over the stack of old journals that lined the makeshift wall around her corner of the basement. A single fluorescent emergency light buzzed above, casting a pale yellow cone over a floor stained by time and forgotten coffee. Her hands reached for the textbook she had tucked between two foam panels. Applied Biostatistics in Oncology. It was a worn, brittle volume, the kind of book that most students skipped in favor of digital copies. But for Wren, it was a treasure. Heavy, real, smelling faintly of mildew and ink. And on page 213, there was something that had kept her mind spinning for days. A model. A clean one. Too clean. She traced the formula again with her fingertip, lips moving silently. It was the Cox proportional hazards model. Elegant, respected, widely used in survival analysis. It assumed that the ratio of hazard, the risk of an event like death or disease progression, remained constant over time, no matter when you started observing it. But Wren knew better. Her mother's decline hadn't been constant. The chemo had worked, then stopped. The scans had improved, then worsened. There were days when she smiled, and days when she forgot Wren's name entirely. Time in biology didn't flow like a stream. It folded, stalled, snapped back. It didn't move in lines. It moved in bruises. She leaned over the broken crate she used as a desk, unrolled a piece of toilet paper stolen from the restroom 2 floors up, and began to write. Slowly, carefully, in small block letters with the dull graphite nub she kept taped inside a hollowed-out pen. Your model assumes time independence, but biological time is never clean. She hesitated. Should she sign it? No. It didn't matter who she was, only that she was right. Wren folded the paper twice and tucked it into a discarded faculty flyer she had found months ago in the recycling bin. Then she stood, shivering as the cold licked at her knees through threadbare jeans. She pulled on her too-big hoodie, flipped the hood up, and slipped into the shadows of the basement stacks. She moved like a ghost, barefoot in wool socks, stepping only on the edges of tiles to avoid creaks. Past old storage rooms and cart tracks long unused. She knew this floor better than most janitors did. Knew which doors stuck, which cameras had blind spots, which vents carried sound up to the faculty offices. She had mapped it in her head, like a maze, like a refuge. Her heart beat faster as she approached the stairwell. The door to the faculty wing was technically locked after midnight, but she had learned that the latch didn't quite catch if you pressed at the right angle. She nudged the metal bar with her shoulder and slipped through. The hallway was utterly still. Fluorescent bulbs flickered overhead, and the air smelled of toner and old carpet. She found the door. W. Grayson, Ph.D., Department of Biostatistics. The name alone made her chest tighten. She had seen him twice, from afar, once when he passed through the library foyer in a long brown coat, and again during a public seminar when she had sat under the back staircase, listening through the vent. His voice was flat, precise, the kind that never wasted a word. He reminded her of a scalpel, sharp, necessary, and cold. She knelt down, heart thudding in her ears, and slid the folded paper under his door. It caught slightly on the rug inside. She gave it one more push, then stood. 5 seconds. 10. No alarms. No footsteps. Wren turned and disappeared the way she came, down the corridor, through the stairwell, into the bowels of the library where the heat barely reached and the dust spoke louder than voices. Back in her corner, she wrapped herself in a wool army blanket. She didn't expect anything to come of the note, but that wasn't the point. She had seen something wrong, and someone needed to say it. The next morning, Professor Walter Grayson arrived at his office precisely at 7:52 a.m., just as he had every weekday for the past 19 years. He didn't notice the folded flyer at first. It was only when he opened the door and felt a slight resistance that he looked down and saw it. Curious, he picked it up, squinting through his bifocals. The handwriting was careful, almost architectural. He read the sentence once, then again. Your model assumes time independence, but biological time is never clean. She hesitated. Should she sign it? No. It didn't matter who she was, only that she was right. Wren folded the paper twice and tucked it into a discarded faculty flyer she had found months ago in the recycling bin. Then she stood, shivering as the cold licked at her knees through threadbare jeans. She pulled on her too big hoodie, flipped the hood up, and slipped into the shadows of the basement stacks. She moved like a ghost, barefoot in wool socks, stepping only on the edges of tiles to avoid creaks, past old storage rooms and cart tracks long unused. She knew this floor better than most janitors did, knew which doors stuck, which cameras had blind spots, which vents carried sound up to the faculty offices. She had mapped it in her head, like a maze, like a refuge. Her heart beat faster as she approached the stairwell. The door to the faculty wing was technically locked after midnight, but she had learned that the latch didn't quite catch if you pressed at the right angle. She nudged the metal bar with her shoulder and slipped through. The hallway was utterly still. Fluorescent bulbs flickered overhead, and the air smelled of toner and old carpet. She found the door. W. Grayson, Ph.D. Department of Biostatistics. The name alone made her chest tighten. She had seen him twice from afar, once when he passed through the library foyer in a long brown coat, and again during a public seminar when she had sat under the back staircase, listening through the vent. His voice was flat, precise, the kind that never wasted a word. He reminded her of a scalpel, sharp, necessary, and cold. She knelt down, heart thudding in her ears, and slid the folded paper under his door. It caught slightly on the rug inside. She gave it one more push, then stood. 5 seconds. 10. No alarms. No footsteps. Wren turned and disappeared the way she came. Down the corridor, through the stairwell, into the bowels of the library, where the heat barely reached and the dust spoke louder than voices. Back in her corner, she wrapped herself in a wool army blanket. She didn't expect anything to come of the note. But that wasn't the point. She had seen something wrong, and someone needed to say it. The next morning, Professor Walter Grayson arrived at his office precisely at 7:52 a.m., just as he had every weekday for the past 19 years. He didn't notice the folded flyer at first. It was only when he opened the door and felt a slight resistance that he looked down and saw it. Curious, he picked it up, squinting through his bifocals. The handwriting was careful, almost architectural. He read the sentence once, then again. Your model assumes time independence, but biological time is never clean. He blinked, closed the door behind him. He did not smile. Grayson hadn't smiled in years. But he sat down at his desk, opened his laptop, and pulled up the model file from the oncology trial. 2 hours later, his coffee untouched and cold, he whispered aloud to no one in particular, "God help me. They might be right." That night, Wren didn't sleep. She lay curled in the dark, arms around the worn edges of her book, and stared up at the ceiling tiles. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, something had shifted. She didn't want fame. She didn't want to be found. But maybe, just maybe, someone was finally listening. Professor Walter Grayson had never liked clutter. He didn't believe in coffee mugs with slogans or in keeping more than 3 pens on his desk. His books were stacked in even rows by subject and by year. His walls were bare except for one framed photo of a chalkboard filled with equations, not even his own. So when he walked into his office that morning and saw the flyer folded in half on the carpet, he paused. He bent down, picked it up. Something about it felt deliberate, too carefully folded, too intentionally placed. Not the usual misdelivered student handout or administrative memo. He unfolded it slowly. The texture was soft. He blinked. Toilet paper. Inside, a message written in neat, deliberate handwriting. Your model assumes time independence, but biological time is never clean. No name, no signature. At first, Grayson scoffed. A prank, he thought. Some graduate student trying to be clever, or worse, one of those activist undergrads who fancied themselves renegade thinkers. He set the paper aside and turned to his computer, opened the file directory, clicked into the folder labeled, the file labeled Trial CYT07 Model, version 3.2. Still, the words lingered. Time independence. He pulled up the data set. The survival analysis had been clean, the hazard ratios elegant, almost too consistent across cohorts. The model assumed that the relative risk of progression between patients stayed proportional, regardless of whether the measurement was at 3 months or 9. That assumption had saved him weeks of work. And yet... He opened the code editor and scanned line 48. There it was. No time interaction term. No check for non-proportional hazards. He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. Who the hell is this? He looked again at the note. There was a precision to the handwriting. Not flowery, not rushed. More like drafting than doodling. The kind of letters formed by someone who thought long before they spoke. He tapped his pen once against the desk, then again. In 20 years of academic work, he'd ignored hundreds of unsolicited emails, overconfident students, and outsider theories. He wasn't the kind of man who entertained amateur commentary. But this wasn't a theory. It was a scalpel, a single surgical strike. He opened the survival plots. With a few quick lines of code, he tested for time-dependent covariates. The result? Significant. Highly. The shape of the curve changed. The confidence intervals widened. The model fractured at the 6-month mark. What had once looked stable now showed deviation. Real deviation. He sat very still. If this were true, and it was looking more likely by the minute, then their published preliminary report was incomplete. Not wrong, but lacking something essential. Something that could affect patient risk evaluation. He stared at the screen for a long time. Then, slowly, he reached for the folded paper again. Biological time is never clean. It wasn't just true. It was poetic. He stood, crossed to the whiteboard, and rewrote the assumption block from the model, then added a note beneath it. Model must allow for temporal interaction. It was 8:53 a.m. when his postdoc, Jeremy, knocked and entered. "Morning, Professor. We got approval from the Internal Review Board on the trial expansion. You want me to start cleaning the cohort data for version 4.0? Grayson turned slowly. "No, not yet." Jeremy blinked. "Is something wrong?" Grayson gestured toward the board. Jeremy frowned. "Time interaction? We didn't account for that in the original run." "Exactly. But, wait, did someone flag that?" Grayson didn't answer. Jeremy picked up the flyer on the desk, sniffed. "Is this toilet paper?" Grayson took it back calmly, folded it, slipped it into the top drawer of his desk. "From now on," he said, "we revisit every assumption. Everyone." He turned back to the board. Behind him, Jeremy stood silently, watching a man who almost never changed direction draw a thick red line through the old model. The classroom was 3 floors above them, a world away. And somewhere in the basement, beneath the marble arches and iron shelves, a girl with cracked hands and dust on her sleeves was asleep beneath the history of medicine, not knowing that the world had just tilted a few degrees in her direction. The emergency light buzzed faintly, the only constant in a space built on forgetting. It flickered once every 20 seconds, then steadied again, casting long shadows across the stacks of discarded journals and archival boxes lining the far corner of Butler Library's lowest level. That's where Wren Elkins lived. Not officially, not legally, not in any documented sense. But for 3 months and 11 nights, she had claimed that patch of cracked tile and cinderblock wall as her own. Her bed was a thick layer of catalog cards bundled inside a linen laundry sack. Her pillow was a canvas tote stuffed with paperback math workbooks. Her blanket was a torn tablecloth she had found in a supply closet, cream-colored, stitched with a faded emblem that read, "Columbia Dining Services." Each night, after the final echoes of student footsteps faded and the janitors swept the last of the salt from the marble floor upstairs, Wren would slip between the book carts and metal shelving units, counting her steps. 13 to the west wall, 8 to the heater that never worked, 4 to her corner. Tonight was no different. She unwrapped a small bundle from her coat pocket, half a bagel, slightly stale, left on a tray in the faculty lounge. She ate slowly, breaking off crumbs to make it last. Her hands trembled slightly, not from hunger but from something else, the dull, electric hum of anticipation. She had left the note, and he had probably read it by now. Wren glanced toward the ventilation shaft above the main corridor. That shaft had become her secret window. Through it, voices from the faculty floor sometimes floated down like ghosts, muffled conversations about conferences, deadlines, funding rounds. She listened, always. Not because she was nosy, but because it was how she remembered that the world still moved above her. Some nights, she wrote what she heard in a spiral notebook she had salvaged from the recycling bin. Names, terms, words she didn't know yet. She would look them up later. Sometimes the words scared her. Other times, they made her feel powerful. Biostatistics, proportional hazard, longitudinal cohort, words with bones. But tonight, there was no voice, just the hum of the light and the shuffle of her coat as she sat cross-legged on the floor, staring at the math problems she had written earlier. She wasn't solving them. Not yet. She was waiting for something to shift. It hadn't always been like this. Wren had once lived in a 3rd-floor apartment off 139th Street, in a building with rusted mailboxes and warm hallways that smelled like toast. Her mother, Martha Elkins, had worked night shifts as a cleaner in this very library. Wren used to sit in the break room and color shapes on the backs of printed invoices while her mother scrubbed bathrooms with lavender-scented soap. Then came the diagnosis. Martha had laughed it off at first. Lymphoma. They caught it early, the doctors said. There was treatment. There was hope. But time played tricks. Some weeks she walked without pain. Others, she couldn't move her legs. The chemo blurred her memory. She forgot appointments, then faces, then names. One day, Wren came home to find the fridge full of spoiled food and the windows wide open in January. Her mother was sitting on the floor, humming a song that didn't have words. It was the last day she remembered hearing her mother speak. After Martha died, Wren was placed in a temporary foster care facility. The staff was polite, the walls were blue, the food was warm, but Wren didn't speak. Not because she couldn't, because no one there had ever scrubbed a library floor, because no one there had a name like Elkins. She left one morning before breakfast, climbing out a side window and catching the downtown bus using quarters she had saved in a Ziploc bag. She didn't run because she hated them. She ran because Columbia was the last place her mother had belonged. And Wren believed, no, she knew that some trace of her mother still lingered between the walls. Maybe in a closet no one opened. Maybe in a book she once cleaned. Maybe in the tile her knees had once touched. She found the old service entrance unlocked, slipped in. No one noticed. She became a shadow. At first, she slept in the boiler room. Too hot. Then behind the microfilm shelves. Too dusty. Eventually, she discovered the lowest level where the forgotten books lived. That was where she built her home. There was something sacred about it. A place where silence wasn't punishment. Where no one asked why she didn't smile. Where she could read without being watched. Her routine was simple. In the mornings, she stayed hidden. In the afternoons, she walked the back halls with a cart she borrowed, straightening books and picking up scraps of paper. At night, she listened and read. She ate what she could find. Granola bars from unlocked drawers, crackers from under seminar tables, lukewarm tea left unattended. Once, she found a paper cup with someone's lipstick mark still on the rim. She washed it. It became her mug. She was careful, quiet, grateful. But she wasn't idle. She studied. Page by page, Wren devoured any book with numbers. Algebra, probability, statistics. She didn't understand everything, but she had the patience most adults lacked. She reread, cross-checked, worked problems in the margins of discarded syllabi. And slowly, the world of models and assumptions, of variables and error bars, began to feel like a language she could speak. Not fluently, not yet, but enough to whisper back. That was why the note had mattered, because she wasn't trying to prove anything. She was trying to tell the truth. Wren looked at the math page in front of her again. Her pencil hovered. She wrote 2 numbers, drew a slash, paused. Then from the shaft above, she heard it. A voice. "We revisit every assumption," a man said. Firm, older. She froze. Then another voice, younger, uncertain. "Is this toilet paper?" She smiled. Her smile was small, rare, like moonlight behind clouds. She didn't know what would come next, but for now, she knew she had been heard. And sometimes, that was everything. She wrapped herself back in the tablecloth, lay down on her bed of catalog cards, and closed her eyes. For the first time in weeks, the hum of the emergency light sounded almost like music. Tomorrow she would read again. Tomorrow she would listen. Tomorrow, the basement wouldn't feel quite so far from the sky. The seminar room on the third floor of the biostatistics wing rarely saw tension. It was the kind of space designed for polite disagreement, for dry posteriors and tepid coffee, not for what was now unfolding. Jeremy stood near the projector, arms crossed, his usual sarcasm replaced by something taut. Around him, 4 graduate students sat in a semicircle, laptops open, screens aglow with updated plots and recalculated confidence intervals. On the whiteboard behind them, the latest version of the survival model loomed large. "So let me get this straight," said Isla, one of the senior PhDs. She pushed up her glasses. "You ran the regression again using Grayson's new spec, and everything tightened. The residuals shrank, the proportionality gap closed, even the outliers aligned." Jeremy nodded. "It's better, objectively." "But we never tested for time interaction before," said Ravi, frowning. "We dismissed that early on because the assumption held in the first iteration." "Apparently it only held under certain stratifications," Jeremy replied. "Once we introduced the time-dependent structure, we captured deviations we hadn't noticed." Silence. A better model should have brought celebration. It meant the data was cleaner, that the trial assumptions were stronger, that patient stratification could be refined and future cohorts more safely assessed. But no one was celebrating, because none of them had made the change, not officially, and the origin of the insight, the note on toilet paper, remained a subject no one quite knew how to touch. "He didn't say where it came from?" Isla asked, voice low. Jeremy shook his head. "Just walked in, rewrote the code, asked me to reprocess the curves, and said we start again from version 4.0, which he's never done mid-phase," Ravi added. "Grayson is the definition of immovable." "Except now," Jeremy said. Another pause. Someone cleared their throat. The radiator hissed in the corner, like the building itself was trying to stay out of it. Finally, Isla leaned back. "I'm not saying it's not correct, but a change like this requires provenance. We have to cite the insight." Jeremy gave a dry laugh. "You want to cite a sentence written on a scrap of paper with no name, no timestamp, and no authorship?" "We can't build peer-reviewed science on folklore," Isla replied. Ravi added more gently, "Even if the insight is real, it has to be accounted for. Otherwise, we risk the integrity of the whole study." The projector fan whirred quietly. Jeremy opened a folder on his laptop, pulled up the original note. He'd scanned it, digitally enhanced it. There it was. The message, in those precise, upright letters. "Your model assumes time independence, but biological time is never clean." It wasn't the kind of sentence someone jotted offhand. It sounded like someone had been listening, watching, waiting. He stared at the handwriting again. Something about it had haunted him since Grayson handed it over. It was the calmness of it. Like truth, written by someone who didn't expect to be heard. Upstairs, Professor Walter Grayson sat alone in his office, rereading the printouts from the model revision. The plots were cleaner, but they also felt more honest. Less like an attempt to fit expectation, more like a reflection of what the data had been trying to whisper all along. He didn't understand why it bothered him. In his long career, he had encountered lucky guesses, hunches, even strokes of misguided genius. But this wasn't luck. It wasn't accident. The note had touched something precise, surgical, unmistakable, and unclaimed. He opened the top drawer, pulled the folded paper out again, smoothed it gently with his palm. The texture was coarse, institutional, but the words, they were the opposite. Clean, specific. He glanced at the signature line again. Blank, of course. But somehow the absence spoke louder than any name could. Why hide? Why not come forward? He thought back to the phrasing. Biological time is never clean. That wasn't something his graduate students would say. It had a kind of melancholy to it, a softness. Not jargon, not defiance. Truth. He set the paper down, opened his browser, typed in the internal access logs for the faculty wing. Nothing unusual. No badge swipes. No visitor sign-ins. He requested the building movement data for that week, but knew it would turn up nothing. Whoever left that note hadn't come through the front. Then he looked at the name again. The name he didn't have. Grayson stood up, walked to the whiteboard. Beneath the revised model, he wrote one word. Source. And under it, a question. Who listens to us so well we don't notice them listening? Later that evening, the research team met again, this time unofficially. No agenda, just takeout containers and silence. Isla poked at her noodles. Ravi stared at a chart he had already memorized. Jeremy scrolled the note again. Then Isla said quietly, "If we find them, the person who wrote it, what do we do?" No one answered, because none of them could admit they weren't just curious. They were in awe, and maybe a little afraid. Afraid that someone who wasn't in their meetings, their labs, their ranks, had seen the truth before they had. Upstairs, Grayson sat in the dark, watching snow fall outside his window. He thought of something his mentor once told him. Real insight doesn't shout. It waits to be recognized. He looked again at the paper on his desk. And for the first time in a very long time, Professor Walter Grayson didn't feel alone in the work. He felt seen. He just didn't know by whom. Not yet. The first time Marge saw her, it was 5:12 a.m., a quiet gray hour, the kind the sun hadn't yet decided to warm. Marge had just unlocked the west service corridor of Butler Library, her keyring jangling like wind chimes in a mausoleum. She always started with the lowest level, part habit, part superstition. Dust always settled first in the places no one looked. She turned the final corner near the archival records room and froze. A pair of feet, small, pale, bare. Wren was curled behind a column beside the old microfilm cabinet, her shoulders rising and falling under a faded tablecloth. One hand clutched a paperback textbook like a stuffed animal. Her other hand rested atop a closed lunchbox with a broken handle. The overhead light flickered, but Wren didn't move. Marge took a cautious step forward. "Sweetheart?" Wren's eyes opened instantly. Not startled, not ashamed, just alert. She blinked slowly and sat up. Marge knelt down beside her, knees cracking. "You live here?" Wren looked down at her knees. "Since the leaves started falling," she said softly. It took Marge a moment to realize that meant early October. It was now late January. She sat back on her heels. Wren pulled the tablecloth tighter around her. Her cheeks were wind-burned, her hair tangled like unraveling thread, but her eyes were sharp. Marge didn't ask the next dozen questions she could have. She didn't scold, didn't shout. Instead, she stood, adjusted the hem of her cardigan, and said only, "Wait here." She returned 10 minutes later with a carton of milk and a folded blanket from the facilities closet. She handed them over silently. Wren accepted them like someone used to transactions, not gifts. "Do you know," Marge said as she sat on the dusty tile beside her, "I've worked here for 30 years and no one's ever noticed when the ceiling leaks. But you did. You stacked books to catch the drips." Wren looked embarrassed. "I didn't want to damage the spines." Marge chuckled. "Honey, half of those books hadn't been touched since the Cold War. But I noticed. They sat in silence. Then cautiously, Wren asked, "Are you going to tell someone?" Marge looked at her long and hard, then said, "No, but I will give you better socks." Wren's lip twitched. It might have been a smile. Over the next few days, their arrangement took shape without a single formal word. Marge left a thermos of soup in the boiler closet on Mondays and Wednesdays. Wren wiped down the catalog drawers and kept the rats out of the far back stacks. When Marge worked late, she sometimes found math notes scribbled on discarded receipt paper or the back of book slips. Strange ideas, clean logic, and always unsigned. She never asked, not directly. But once, as they sorted a donation bin full of old maps, she said, "You write like someone who's not afraid to be wrong." Wren had paused. "I'm more afraid of being ignored." Marge said nothing, but that night she left a flashlight by the old history section. With a note. Some truths take time to read. Wren told her about her mother only once. It was snowing again. The wind had gotten into the vents. The lights above the philosophy shelves kept flickering. "She used to work here. My mom. Janitorial night shift. Martha Elkins." Marge's breath caught. She hadn't heard that name in over a decade. "She died when I was 6. Lymphoma." Marge nodded. "You came back here to find her?" Wren hesitated. "I came back because this was the only place she ever said she liked. She'd come home with her clothes smelling like old paper and floor wax, and she'd say it smelled like thinking." Marge looked away. Her late husband used to say similar things, that bookshelves weren't furniture, they were memory banks. That night, Marge went home and dug through her own attic. She found an old staff photo from 2009, and there, in the 3rd row, smiling in a navy jacket, Martha Elkins. She brought it to Wren the next morning. Wren didn't say anything. She just held the photo for a long time. Then, very softly, said, "I don't remember her face, but I remember her voice." Marge nodded. "That's the part that matters." On Thursday morning, Marge installed a small lockbox behind the HVAC panel in the storage annex. Inside, she placed 3 granola bars, a toothbrush, a copy of Charlotte's Web, and a note. "If you ever need to leave fast, take this first." She taped the key to the back of the 4th tile from the floor. Wren found it by accident and cried. They didn't speak every day, but when they did, it was the kind of speech that used no wasted words. Once, Wren asked, "Why do you help me?" Marge didn't look up from her cart. "Because someone helped me once, and she looked a lot like you." That was the end of it. Some days Wren left small thank yous, a folded paper crane on a windowsill, a math puzzle paper-clipped to a forgotten bookmark. Once, a single acorn beside Marge's mug, no explanation. But Marge understood. Some girls wrote in journals. Wren left equations. Weeks passed. Snow came in waves. The university moved forward, unaware that 2 of its quietest souls had formed something strong beneath its feet. Not a secret, a shelter. And neither of them needed it explained. Because in the hush of the basement, where no one clapped and no one recorded, an old widow and a forgotten child had done something almost miraculous. They had seen each other and chosen to stay. The storage annex was silent, save for the low hum of the overhead fluorescents. Wren had long since mapped the rhythm of the basement, which pipes hissed on the hour, which heaters coughed when the wind shifted. But today the silence felt reverent. She had been sorting through a stack of disused academic journals, hoping to find a usable notebook or two, when she noticed a misaligned panel on the lower shelving unit. Curiosity, Her oldest companion nudged her forward. Inside, behind layers of cobwebbed paperbacks, was a rusted metal file box. Heavy, with a worn sticker on top, Staff, Part-Time, 2006-2010. She pulled it out, coughing at the dust cloud, and opened the lid. The folders were alphabetical. She flipped through them absently until her fingers stopped at a tab that read, Elkins, Martha. Her hands trembled. Inside, a faded ID photo, shift logs, and a single typed evaluation from 2008. Quiet, punctual, keeps the archives immaculate, brings her own tea, declined all offers for staff social events. Notes in the margins mentioned childcare conflicts. One entry read, left early, child with fever. Wren blinked rapidly. She hadn't cried in months. Not really. But now, with her mother's name, her full name, on official paper, tears crept uninvited. There was one more item in the folder. A safety memo listing emergency contacts. Under dependent, Wren Elkins, age 4. She sat on the floor. Then she wrote. Another note. Neat. Precise. Like always. You missed the survivor bias in your cohort sample. My mother died from that. She folded it, walked upstairs, and slid it beneath Professor Grayson's office door. Grayson returned to campus late that evening. Snow had begun to fall again, blanketing the quad in white. He walked the hallway with the slow gait of someone carrying an unseen weight. The note was waiting. He didn't open it at first, just stared, then knelt to pick it up. As he read the sentence, his hand gripped the edge of the doorframe. You missed the survivor bias in your cohort sample. My mother died from that. He read it again. He thought of the last trial, the failed projections, the patients who hadn't qualified because their metrics had skewed the outcome. The logic had seemed sound at the time. Clean data, clear endpoints. But he knew better now. Survivor bias, the fallacy of only examining those who made it through, never the ones who didn't. An omission not just of data, but of people, of pain. He walked to the whiteboard, reviewed the model again. Sure enough, the weight adjustment in Phase 2 had dismissed the outliers as statistical noise. But the outliers had names. He remembered his wife, Claire, smiling through the nausea, the appointments, the hope. She hadn't met the trial's criteria. Too many variables, wrong subtype. Too late. He had never told anyone. Now, here was this child. No name, no face, only insight. Again. And this time, grief. It echoed. He sank into his chair. Minutes passed. Then, slowly, he took a marker and revised the model header. From Cohort Integrity Review, V4.1. To Including the Lost, V4.2. Then he added a note to the margin. All insights are data, especially the quiet ones. And beneath that, a name he didn't know, but now couldn't forget. Martha Elkins. That night, Grayson walked through the library. He didn't know what he was looking for. Maybe silence, maybe the author, maybe a ghost. He paused near the back stacks, the old philosophy wing. A light flickered once. He whispered as if to the air, I missed her too. No reply came, but something shifted. Not in the air, in him. And it stayed. The faculty conference room had never been this full. Chairs were dragged in from neighboring offices. Coffee had run cold in untouched cups. The walls bore no sound but the quiet hum of the space heater and the occasional creak of a shifting coat. Professor Grayson stood at the front, not behind a podium, but beside a whiteboard covered in revised projections, smoothed regression curves, and two simple handwritten lines. New stratification, phase 4.2. Insight source, anonymous. He looked tired, but there was something steadier in his posture than usual, less rigid, more aware. "Before we begin," he said, voice even but low, "I want to acknowledge that what you'll see today, this version of our model, is not solely the result of this team's work." The room shifted. Isla crossed her legs. Jeremy closed his laptop halfway. Robbie stopped biting his pen. Grayson took a breath. "I've received a series of notes. Anonymous, no origin, no name, no request for credit. Just clarity. Phrases written on whatever material was available. But in every case, those phrases pointed out what we missed." He turned to the whiteboard. "The survivor bias correction, the time dependence model, even the suggestion that we revisit exclusion parameters for subcohort B." He tapped the upper corner of the diagram. It read, "Mortality adjusted, including outlier progression curves." These ideas didn't come from protocol. They didn't come from me. He paused. They came from someone watching, listening. Someone who, despite being outside the circle, saw more clearly than those of us inside it. No one spoke. Grayson continued, eyes sweeping the room. "Science demands humility, and whether this contributor is a colleague, a student, or a ghost of our own conscience, they've reminded me, us, what it means to actually observe, not just data, but the silence around it." Ravi whispered, almost reflexively, "Like seeing in the dark." Grayson nodded once. "That's exactly right." Above the conference room, past the mechanical lift, through the ceiling vent that opened onto the gabled crawl space of the old biostatistics wing, Wren lay still. Her face was smudged with dust. Her hoodie was zipped tight. A piece of duct tape on her left sneaker had peeled loose, flapping slightly with every small shift of her foot. She didn't move much. She didn't want to make a sound. Through the metal grating, she could hear everything. When Grayson had said, "They've reminded me," her breath caught. And when he had admitted, "They saw more clearly than us," she closed her eyes. He was starting to listen. She mouthed the words without speaking. "He's beginning to hear." And for a girl who hadn't been seen in months, that was almost enough. Back in the room, Grayson clicked through the slides. The presentation was clean, leaner, more confident. But he kept returning to that phrase, "someone who saw." When he concluded the formal review, there were no questions, no challenges. Instead, there was something rarer, agreement. After the meeting, Jeremy approached him. "You really don't know who it is?" Grayson shook his head. "Not yet. But you think they're on campus?" Grayson stared at the folded chair still leaning against the wall. "I think they're here, in more ways than we know." Later that night, Wren returned to her corner beneath the philosophy wing. She had the leftover crust of a sandwich, a book on probability theory, and one line echoing in her head, "Science demands humility." She whispered it again and again, like a prayer. She thought of her mother, brushing dust off volumes with care. She thought of the files she had found, of her name typed beside the word dependent. And she thought of the man upstairs, once blind to her existence, now naming the dark as if it had meaning. She reached for her pencil stub, wrote one more line on the back of a torn page. The ones you don't see are still part of the data. She folded it gently. Tomorrow she would leave it outside Grayson's office. But tonight, she curled into her blanket of tablecloths and for the first time in a long time slept without dreaming of running. Not because she was safe, but because someone was finally looking for her. Above, in the office of a man once too proud to admit uncertainty, the whiteboard remained untouched. But on the lower corner, written in small, unsure handwriting, was a new word: student. It was Marge who opened the door. Not just the locked gate that separated the basement utility corridors from the rest of the Columbia campus, but the quiet boundary between knowing and not knowing. She met Grayson at dawn, before the halls filled with students, before emails could pile into inboxes like a second tide. He was standing at the elevator, a folder in hand, his coat slightly wrinkled from a night spent thinking more than sleeping. "Come," she said simply. He followed. Down 2 flights, past the stacks of unused archival boxes, through a metal door with a faded label, Facilities Maintenance, Authorized Staff Only. Marge walked slowly, deliberately, her flashlight cutting a path through the dim, dust-suspended air. The hallway narrowed. Pipes lined the walls like old bones. Somewhere above, the world bustled, but down here, time held its breath. They stopped before a storage alcove barely wider than a closet. There, beneath a tattered Columbia banner used once for commencement, a girl sat cross-legged on a folded tarp. Her shoes were taped at the seams. Her blanket was a tablecloth. Her hair was pulled into a messy braid, and her hands held a book half filled with notes. She looked up, not startled, not afraid, just quiet. Marge didn't speak. She stepped back and let the silence do the work. Grayson approached, slowly. Wren watched him, unblinking. He knelt. Not close, just enough to be eye level. The folder in his hands remained closed. For a moment, neither spoke. Then, "How long have you been down here?" Wren shrugged. "Since the leaves turned." He nodded once, absorbing that. Another pause. Then he asked, "Why didn't you tell someone?" Wren looked away. "Tried once. Didn't help." Grayson exhaled slowly. He tapped the folder against his palm. "Did you write the notes?" Wren blinked, then gave a small nod. He studied her. This girl, maybe 12, maybe younger, had adjusted a model that had baffled senior researchers, had corrected assumptions with the precision of a postdoc, had done all of it without being seen. "How?" he asked. Not accusing, not demanding, just curious. Wren tilted her head, thinking, then answered, "I read, then read again, then again, until it stopped hurting my head." Grayson felt his breath catch. It was the most honest description of learning he'd heard in years. She pointed to a pile of crumpled pages. "I don't understand everything, but I know when something feels wrong." He didn't reply. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, well-worn book. He placed it gently beside her. Bayesian Survival Analysis, the title read. Wren looked at it, then at him. "It's not a gift," he said. "It's an invitation." She touched the cover. Her fingers were ink-stained, small. Grayson stood. "I'll be back tomorrow, same time. If you want, we can go through it together." Wren said nothing, but she didn't let go of the book. As he and Marge walked away, Grayson asked quietly, Why didn't you tell me sooner? Marge didn't look at him. She wasn't ready to be seen, she said. And neither, Grayson realized, had he been ready to look. But the door at the end of the hall had opened, and some doors, once opened, do not close again. A cold morning broke over Columbia's campus, its ivy walls glowing gold in the dawn light. In the center of it all, Low Memorial Library stood like a silent guardian, a cathedral not of worship, but of words. Wren stood at its steps, her patched shoes quiet on the stone. Her breath came in little clouds, not from nerves, but from something else, something she hadn't yet named. Behind her, the university moved as always, students rushing with coffee, professors glancing at watches, the low murmur of knowledge in motion. But this morning, something had shifted. In her pocket was a letter. A real one. Not scraps, not notes. A sealed envelope addressed to her in careful type. She had received it 2 nights ago. Professor Grayson had placed it in her hands without a word. Just a nod. She had opened it in the dark, back in her quiet corner, reading each line slowly, as if her eyes might trick her. Columbia University is honored to offer Wren Elkins the Martha Elkins Memorial Fellowship for unaffiliated scholars. This recognition is granted to exceptional young minds with no formal guardianship, legal residence, or access to traditional education systems. In memory of Martha Elkins, former part-time Columbia Library associate, Wren had read it 10 times, her mother's name, there, on university letterhead, not filed in a dusty basement, not whispered in a hallway, printed, remembered, seen. The administrative committee had not been quick to agree. Grayson had gone in person, the old folders in his hand, a copy of Wren's annotated survival model in his briefcase. She's unaffiliated, one board member had said flatly. No records, no address, no enrollment. Grayson had replied, voice even. She corrected a statistical flaw that misrepresented hundreds of patients' timelines, from a basement. Another had scoffed. How do we verify it's her work? I've seen her write, Grayson had said. You can't fake that kind of clarity. It wasn't his arguments that moved the board. It was the name. Martha Elkins. Grayson had done the digging, found payroll stubs from 15 years ago, a job history buried in maintenance records, a single staff photo, her eyes kind, her posture proud. She dusted your archives, he had said. Now her daughter is rewriting your models. That had been the turning point. The vote passed, and for the first time in its history, Columbia offered a fellowship with no grades, no ID, no history required, only mind. Wren now stood inside the rotunda, where plaques named every donor and pioneer who had walked these halls. Above her, the dome glowed with natural light. A few students passed by, not noticing her, but she noticed everything. She traced the walls with her eyes. Then she saw it, a small brass plate affixed just outside the dean's office. Martha Elkins Memorial Fellowship for the invisible, the unregistered, the unforgettable. She didn't cry, but she felt something soften inside her. A place that had been clenched for so long, it had forgotten how to open. Behind her, footsteps. Grayson. He stood a few paces away, letting her read without interruption. After a moment, she turned. You didn't have to name it after her. I didn't, he said. You did. You made her work matter again. Wren looked at the plate. She never got to see this place fully. Maybe, Grayson said gently, but now she never leaves it. Wren smiled, just slightly. They walked together into the main hall. It was Wren's first day officially on campus, no longer a ghost, no longer a whisper behind the dry wall. Students brushed past her with books and earbuds and deadlines. Some didn't notice her, some looked twice. She didn't flinch. Her ID badge, temporary, printed that morning, hung slightly crooked. The photo was a little blurry, but it was hers. She stopped outside her first seminar room. Mathematical Ethics and Real-World Applications. Grayson stood beside her. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded, then paused. "It still feels like I'm sneaking in." Grayson smiled. "You're not. This door opens for you now." She stepped inside. The room quieted. Wren walked to the front row, not the back, and opened her notebook. Her fingers trembled a little, but the pencil was steady. One student leaned over and whispered, "Are you the one who solved the bias model?" Wren didn't answer. She didn't need to. She just wrote one line at the top of the page. M. Elkins, present. For the first time in her life, Wren Elkins wasn't learning to escape. She was learning to remember. And this place, this light-filled, book-lined hall, was finally ready to remember her too. The clock struck midnight in the depths of Butler Library, and instead of silence, there was soft laughter. Pencils scribbled, pages turned. Equations unfolded not in solitude but in chorus. The overhead lights buzzed slightly, dimmed to their lowest setting, casting a warm amber hue across the basement walls that once echoed only with the sound of ventilation and forgotten footsteps. Tonight, there were 10 students seated in a wide half-circle, notebooks open, eyes steady. No roll call, no grading rubric, just a handwritten sign at the stairwell. Midnight Study Circle. All minds welcome. At the center stood Wren Elkins, a little taller now, a little more sure in her stance. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Calm, crisp. "This isn't a class," she said. "It's a practice. Of seeing, of questioning, of staying curious when no one's watching." She turned to the whiteboard, one she had cleaned and repainted herself over winter break. A clean slate, now marked with the opening sentence of the evening. Don't assume time is kind. Assume it's messy, and still model it anyway. The students began working in silence. Not the anxious kind, but the focused one. Wren moved among them, sometimes correcting an equation, sometimes kneeling beside someone too shy to speak. Across from her sat a student named Theo, struggling with nested integrals. Wren didn't take the marker from him. She asked, "Where does it stop making sense?" He pointed. She nodded. "Then let's walk backward from there." At the far end of the room, Sophia, first year, always hooded, raised her hand slowly. "Does it have to be right?" she asked. "No," Wren answered. "It just has to be honest." Outside the glass panel, beyond the dusty old door no longer locked at night, someone watched. Grayson. Hands in his coat pocket, scarf tight around his neck, he stood still as the quiet scene unfolded in front of him. The girl who had once lived in the margins was now at the center, and no one seemed to question why. He didn't enter. He didn't need to. Instead, he rested one hand gently on his chest, where the ache had once been, where the silence used to echo. And he whispered, not aloud, but within, "The best data I ever found came from the girl who lived in the noise I ignored." He turned away with a soft smile. Back in the room, Wren took one last look at her students. Students without pedigree, without perfect transcripts, some without homes, some without hope. But all of them there, all of them willing to learn in the dark. She turned to the board and wrote 2 more words under her opening line. Session 1. Then, quietly, with the grace of someone who understood both solitude and belonging, Wren Elkins sat among them. The library was no longer dark. It had become a lighthouse,